This is Unfiltered Therapist, and we're about to break barriers, embrace growth, and invite you to join in this journey of true, authentic self-discovery. Let's do this. Yay! Hi, Kristy.
Hi, Allegra.
My favorite part of this recording right now is that you are 2 doors down from me in our office, but we can't figure out technology to sit in a room together, so this is how we're talking. So anyway, we're making it work. This has been a conversation that's been a long time coming because we've been talking about having you be one of the first guests when we started the podcast, and scheduling and life and things, and so much of this is going to make sense soon. So I'm just so grateful we could finally make this happen.
Thank you.
And
Me too.
oh gosh, finally. And honestly, I really want to applaud you because I know what we're talking about today is incredibly vulnerable on so many levels. And I applaud you because I didn't even ask for this. You were like, I just want to like lay it out there, like balls to the wall. I want to just like put it all out there. And I was like, are you sure? And you're like, yeah. So I think that you are about to make a massive difference for people in your willingness to kind of just go there.
Okay, hope so. That's my hope.
I have zero concern. Like I'm just, well, first and foremost, I'm just obsessed with you. For anyone who doesn't know, so Kristy is one of our therapists. Kristy's been on my team for almost a year, and I knew Kristy through the grapevine of the social work realm, if you will, prior to her joining my team. And then she reached out to me and said, I want to come work for Kindred Roots. We met up, and I just like knew right away that it was definitely the right thing. And she's an absolute rock star, a amazing therapist. Her clients are obsessed with her. And might I say she is accepting new clients? Dun, dun, dun. So today, though, we are going to talk about Kristy's life and how incredibly resilient she is. And I think you're going to absolutely blow people's mind when they know your story and then know you, because my word, girlfriend, do you have reasons to not be the person that you are today? And yet here you are.
I'm taking a deep breath. Okay.
Deep breath. Okay. So I'm going to start at the beginning of what I know.
Okay.
And
yeah.
I want you to kind of like take us through this. So today, Kristy's going to be sharing with us a lot of her health history, her experience of her own health, the healthcare system, and the effects that this has had on her life. And to start this, when I first met Kristy, when we went for coffee to talk about getting into Kindred Roots, I had no idea that Kristy had a heart transplant when she was young. And she shows up to this coffee shop. And for people who are watching on video, you're going to see this. If not, I'll tag it in the bottom of the episode. But she shows up with this whole ass novel and says, oh, by the way, I'm a published novelist and I've written about my story and here's my book. Which I was like, pardon me. And from there, I just have gotten to know her. And so I want to start with Kristy. Tell us from the beginning, where do you want this story to start?
Okay, I guess, yeah, just from the beginning. So I'm born and raised in Alberta, grew up in Medicine Hat, and at about the age of probably 12, I started to get like sick quite a bit. Waking up in the morning with like really puffy eyes, kind of flu-like symptoms for a while. And it kind of just out of the blue, I went to school one day, came home, I was throwing up on the bus. My mom took me to Merge, and my albumin was low. So albumin's like the protein, right? It was leaking through my body somehow. So it was making me really sick. Fast forward probably about a year in and out of hospitals, mostly in and out of the Medicine Hat Hospital, eventually being sent to Calgary, the old children's hospital, which what we know now is the Richmond Road Diagnostics Center. So
that little place.
Yeah. And eventually it was December 1995. My pediatric cardiologist said, we know what's wrong. the lining around your heart is too tight and it's not allowing your heart to pump.
Mm.
But if we go in and do a surgery, like just cut you open, remove the lining around your heart, you will be cured. And you will be able to just go on and live a normal, healthy life.
Wow.
I'd already been diagnosed with what they call lymphangiectasia. So my body wasn't absorbing the fats I ate. So I was on this like really, really low fat diet, 25 grams of fat a day. It was just like my mom was measuring all the fats I ate every day. Like I'd never even heard of MCT oil until that time.
Wow.
So anyways, they did the surgery, even though I didn't feel in like that pit of your stomach where you're like, no, I don't think that's it. But I mean, I don't really have a lot of options. So December 1995, they go in and do the surgery. And afterwards, I kind of come out of the surgery like I could tell something was wrong, but I also couldn't talk. I still had it. I was still intubated. So I remember like writing like, am I cured? And my mom would just kind of, you know, politely ignore me. Same with my dad and, you know, redirect and that kind of thing. And then eventually when I was able to have the breathing tube out and, you know, the first thing I said, like, am I cured? And my mom said, we have to wait and talk to the doctor. And I'll never forget that day. My mom and dad come in, my cardiologist at the time, and we were sitting in this circle. And yeah, he gave us the news that I needed a heart transplant and that I would be sent to Edmonton in January of 1996 and go through that whole like getting listed and that sort of thing.
So how old were you at this point?
I was 13 years old. Yeah. And so, I mean, I guess the fun part about it was that I was going to miss school. That seemed kind of cool. But
oh, like, were you like at that point when at 13 years old? Because I'm curious, I like don't know. I don't even know how you can fathom that type of information at that age, specifically about yourself. Like at that point, were you like, oh, that's cool, I'll get a heart transplant and move on? Did you like have fears that you were going to die? Like what was your understanding?
So I think the number one thing I was like, so I have to get someone else's heart. Like I couldn't wrap my brain around that. Like somebody has to die for me to live. And at 13 years old, that's like, I'm like, well, why am I worthy of that? Like, and I remember going to the transplant program in Edmonton and the coordinator at the time, she straight out asked me, do you want a heart transplant? I said, no. They wouldn't put me on the list until I said yes.
At 13.
Yeah. And like we butted heads with this lady, but at the end of it all, she was actually probably partly who saved my life as well. Not just my organ donor, but shout out, her name's Linda. She doesn't work there anymore, but she's a big, huge, like she was very like you have to know all your medication. You have to know why you're taking them. Like, so, and I think that is probably what got me through to where I am today. But I also would go to bed at night, like cuddling with my little Shih Tzu dog, Tinker, at the time.
I had a dog named Tinkerbell growing up.
Did you really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You. Okay, continue.
And just like, cause I would hear my mom and dad like interviews with the news and they'd be like, 99% of cases die with 1 year. And now I've been diagnosed, like, we don't know when exactly I got sick. And so now it's like, oh, restrictive cardiomyopathy. I finally have a name to what's going on. But 99% of cases die within 1 year. We don't know if I've had this like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. We don't know. We do know it's not genetic. That's what we were told. It does not run in families. And it's just something that happens. And yeah. And so I went to Edmonton for transplant workup. I was very, very aware that like there is a possibility I won't get a heart. At that time, this is going to make me feel really old or sound old. We had to carry like a pager. My mom had a pager, like old school pager. It didn't work in the airport typically. And if a plane flew over, it could send the pager to go off. Yeah. So like there were
also just had question marks if you were even going to get the right message that a heart was ready.
Yeah. So like one time we're like eating supper and the pager goes off and we're like, and then like my mom calls like Edmonton right away and they're like, nope, that wasn't us. Like, okay, good. Okay. Like good, not good. Oh. Like, you know, it's so hard because you know someone's going to die.
Right.
no matter what, right? I did from the get-go in January. I always just said, I think I'll get my heart in May. If I get a heart, it'll be in May.
Where
May
do you
just,
think that came from?
I don't know. I think because I'm born in May, I was like, May's a great month. And funny, that's, yeah, I got my heart on May 26th, 1996.
Wow. And so from
Which,
the moment the page goes off,
yeah.
how long until you had to like be in Edmonton, prep for surgery, doing
So
the thing?
that's kind of a funny story, actually, because I also, because I was so like realistic with my health condition, I was granted a wish trip from the Wish Foundation. And I said, I want to go on my wish before, like, I want to go on it now, basically, because I don't think I'm going to live. They were
Oh,
a little like, and I said, no, like, seriously. So at that time, I was like probably the biggest Reba McEntire fan ever. And I wished to meet Reba McEntire.
this,
So on May 25th, my mom and dad and my brother and I flew down to Texas. We landed in Dallas, got off the plane. It was a nightmare trying to find our luggage. I don't know if you've ever been to that Dallas-Fort Worth airport, but
yeah,
it
it's
is
nuts.
freaking massive.
Mm-hmm.
We're also from like small town Medicine Hat, so it's like we do not know what we're doing, and I feel like everything we do as a family is always a shit show.
Yeah.
So, and at that time my parents smoked, so they were like trying to find like places that they could go outside to smoke and stuff too, and just like it was just like crazy.
Nuts.
Eventually we got out of the airport, probably after 2 hours of trying to find our luggage, and we're in the rental car on our way to get to Denison where we're staying, and the pager goes off. And
Stop. And so just to clarify, like you're going on this Make-A-Wish trip and
yeah,
it's under the pretense that you're like, I don't think I'm getting a heart. I think I'm going to die. So I want to do this. And
yeah,
like, so there's literally up until this point, no connection that the next day you'd be getting a heart.
no, none. And in fact, I was like, this is kind of like my last hurrah with my family, right? Like,
Oh my
I
gosh.
didn't ever probably share my like own internal stuff with my family because I didn't want to worry my mom and dad and my brother, right? That's
Hard.
just how I was then. And probably still am now, part of my people pleasing.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, and so then we have to like try and find somewhere to pull off on this freeway that we have no idea where we're going. We have no GPS because granted, this is 1996, right? Like
You're
we don't
using a
know what the
map.
hell
Yeah.
my mom can't read when someone's driving. So it's just like, so everybody's kind of bickering at everybody. I'm just like sitting silent, like, I can't believe this. Like, there's no possible way that this is actually the call.
Hmm.
We finally get to I think it was like a Taco Bell or something. And my mom goes to like ask this lady if she can use the payphone because someone's on it. And she's like, wouldn't let my mom use the payphone. And it was just
What?
like, I have to call Edmonton to see if there's a heart available for my daughter. Like, she
Yeah.
didn't care. She wasn't having any of that.
Even after
And
hearing that you were pending a heart transplant, this person wouldn't get off the phone.
no, yeah, she was just like, yeah. So I can't remember if she like went into Taco Bell or whatever, used the phone, or finally the lady got off the payphone. I just remember like my brother got out, my mom and dad are like at the payphone. I think it was at the payphone. My brother gets back in and he literally like he just gets in. So like I'm 13, he's like 15 because we're only like, or he's 16, we're 3 years apart. He's like, Chris, you got a heart. And that's all he says. And I look
Wow.
over and I just start crying.
Oh, I have
Yeah.
goosebumps. Like I can't even
Uh,
imagine that.
yeah.
I can't
So then the whole thing is like, now we got to get back. We got to get back to Alberta. They've been trying to page us for over 2 hours. It wasn't working because we were in the airport. So they're like, you guys need to get back now. Like, we have a heart available. This is also just coming at the tip end of my parents had like fought the government to have me double listed. Like, there was a whole thing. Because back in the 90s, hearts were like, if they're available, they went to a certain area. And so,
Mm.
yeah, so my parents had fought the government so I could actually get double listed in somewhere in the United States to higher my chances of getting a heart.
Wow.
Yeah. So we do get back late, May 26th, which happens to be my heart donor's birthday. So I get my
Oh,
heart on her birthday.
Oh my gosh. And do you know anything about your heart donor?
I do, yeah. So because of my parents fighting the government and being so vocal in the news and being from a small town, the news actually figured it out. I don't even know how they did it, but they figured out like who my donor family was, probably because when my donor, I'll use her name just because I know the family will be consenting to that and would actually probably rather me use her name than
Yeah,
say
of
donor.
course, please.
So her name's Dawn. And so when she was in her car accident, and they donated her organs, it was kind of in the news as well. And then it says Southern Alberta girl gets heart, and the news was able to like kind of put that together. They actually interviewed them. We were at the same hospital. We were both at the U of A. So my mom and dad could have like passed them not even knowing, which is kind of
Wow.
bizarre when you think about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's insane. I mean, it's so much one of those like the entire world is just like 1 degree apart. Like that you're just
Yeah.
like how can you even fathom
Yeah.
that that's happening?
Yeah. And
Wow.
then
How old was Dawn?
she died the day before her 23rd birthday. So
Wow.
she was in a car as a passenger and her boyfriend at the time, and they were driving to, I think, a baseball game, and somebody ran a stop sign. She had taken her seatbelt off kind of right at that time to grab something in the back, and and someone came through and hit her. A young driver, and yeah, and
Oh.
her boyfriend survived. It's been a challenge for him too. So yeah.
Did
But
you ever
then
meet him?
I did meet him like a couple of years, about 4 years ago. We had mutual friends in common. That she needed a kidney transplant, and they were doing a fundraiser for her. And my husband was actually their best man at their wedding, and we went down to do the fundraiser, and he came too to meet me. And yeah,
Come on. This
yeah,
is so crazy.
yeah,
So
yeah.
crazy. And was he like is there any like how does it feel? I mean, there's always this like, question mark about like when you are given an organ donation, do you like feel this person or like do you feel a connection to this person? Like and then you're meeting their loved ones. Like what has that been like for you?
Well, for me, like so the first time I ever met her mom, Coral, and her sister Heather was after I had twin girls. Once they found out, and that was in the news as well, that I had given birth to twin girls, they were like, "We have to meet you," because I guess Dawn had talked about having twins all the time. And so that was pretty amazing, right? Like I'll never forget. It was like my mom was there, myself, and then like my kids were really, really tiny at the time. They were just like, because they were preemies too. So, and I think they were like maybe 6 months old. And I think Coral's holding one, and so we asked someone to take a picture, and she's like, "Oh, how do you all know each other?" And Coral just says, "She has my daughter's heart."
Wow.
Is this like so like, and I'm sure that person was just like, "What?
Wow.
Are you kidding me?"
Can we also pause for a second again, because I want this whole story of you to come together. So, Kristy, you have twin daughters.
Mm-hmm.
How old were you when you delivered your twin daughters?
Oh gosh, 19. Probably not every parent's.
Listen, this is more so a conversation of resilience.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So, were you in the news related to the birth of your daughters because it's like, look at how far this girl has come post heart transplant, or was it related to something else?
I think it was also like in the medical field that nobody else in the world had given birth to twins having had a heart transplant. I think there's been people giving birth to twins, not twins, but giving birth to one. But when you have a heart transplant, it's like more complicated, and just the stress of that on your heart. And so I think it was more of a medical miracle rather than even just like, look how far you've come. Like, this is a medical miracle. We now know you can get, because actually I was told by doctors I couldn't get pregnant.
Wow. So like, and how old were you when they had told you this? Like right after your transplant? Like
yeah,
14,
like I
15
think
years
I was
old?
probably, when I got a little older, like 16, and they're like, you won't be able to get pregnant. Likely because of your medication and that sort of thing. And so I think because we were so focused on my health all the time, I never really had that conversation with my parents about like, hey, you know, don't get pregnant. But
Because everyone to this point's like, you can't. Like,
yeah,
do your thing, girl. Have a good time.
yeah. And I never even like thought about it, right? And I think, and then when it actually happened, I mean, I think you always have those like conversations with your friends. What if you got pregnant? What would you do? What would you do? And and like, well, I actually had booked an abortion appointment. My kids know that too, because I've been very open with them. They're older now.
Yeah.
But it was just like, you know what, as soon as I told my mom, I told them separately because I thought that would be less, on me.
Like you told your mom and your dad separately.
Yeah, and I told my mom while I was driving because I was driving, so then she couldn't.
You're like, if it goes bad, I'll handle it. Yeah.
Yeah. And and both of them, like right away, my mom was like, "You're not giving them up for Well, you're not giving it up for adoption." We didn't know it was twins at the time.
Right.
I canceled that appointment when I found out it was twins.
How far along were you when you found out?
I would say probably, I think like 14 weeks.
Okay,
13.
so you were, not like brand new pregnant.
No. And here's the thing though, you can't get an abortion appointment. Well, I don't know if it's changed, but at the time, like I tried to book an abortion appointment because you could get an abortion without your parents knowing. But I had to get an ultrasound done first, and I was having trouble getting into the ultrasound in time to be able to have an abortion. And so I was like, I need to tell my mom and dad, like, this is not, the dates are not coinciding. They're not working out. Like, and I really thought to myself, like, why am I considering abortion? Because I'm worried my parents won't accept me. What is it? Right?
Yeah. And what was it?
I think part of that, I think it was like, I'll disappoint my parents, but their reaction was not one of disappointment.
How was your dad's reaction?
He actually has heart problems now, we know. This heart thing is genetic, apparently. Now we know that. But he said, I don't know if my heart can take this. Like, I think he was more worried about my health too, right?
Absolutely. Because I can imagine too that, like, as a parent, if you're told that your child will never be able to conceive, and then not only are you pregnant, but like you're young, and I would imagine that the feelings attached to that would be so complicated because you're like, this is a miracle, but also like, what? Like, it's just so complicating.
Yeah. Yeah.
How, so when you found out you were pregnant, you now found out you have twins. And you said as soon as you found out you had twins that you were like, no, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
From that point, what was your like attachment to motherhood? Were you like, I'm ready for this? Like, what came next for you?
Oh, every time I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. I can barely take care of myself. I'm sick. Like, and I, when I'm sick, like I need my mom. And I'm like, how's this going to look? And I wasn't in a stable relationship, with the biological father. So that was a challenge. I didn't even have my high school degree yet, or diploma.
Yeah.
So there was so much, right? Like my parents were in the middle of selling their house in Medicine Hat. That was my childhood home. That I had like these own kind of like dreams of raising my own children and like, living on a farm and all of that stuff. So it just like, I need my mom. How am I going to be a mom? Yeah. But then a lot of that, I think too, like I remember a moment sitting in my bedroom in our house before it sold, and I was just like crying, and I'm like, no one's gonna love me because now I'm like pregnant and I'm gonna have like, people think of that like baggage.
Yeah. And especially at that age, because you just have like, it's such a like transformative part of your life. And like, so for you, because of having the transplant, were you like delayed in finishing your like grade school years?
Well, thankfully for that, they actually just continued to pass me, which I don't know if that's right or wrong, because I'm sure I missed stuff, but like,
but you're here.
I am, yeah. And I mean, I'm pregnant. It was like 2001. I am writing my biology final, and I know I'm not going to pass it. It's just to get it done. And I did not graduate with a high school diploma, which also then like adds another layer of like this shame and like, and then it's interesting how like when something happens to you, and I don't know if you find this, like you like when you buy that red car, you always see the red freaking car. I'm pregnant. I'm a teenager. And I see all these like statistics commercials coming up on TV. Don't be that statistic. Don't be, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like what is happening?
I had never actually thought about that until right now. Thank you for sharing that. Like, because I remember being the kid watching the like commercials or the shows being like, yeah, like don't be the statistic, and like the like fear mongering around like sex and sexuality and like having a healthy relationship with sex. And I never imagined what it would be like to be the person who is pregnant watching the shame-based like messaging everywhere, but like don't be one, and you're like, oh, so what does that make me?
Yeah, like, oh, too late.
Yeah, well, cool. I guess like there's that. So you was biology then like the last course that you had to
and I wrote it, and I remember I think I wrote it in like Edmonton or something. I don't even know why. Or maybe I was going, so my parents ended up selling their house and my dad got a job in Red Deer, and I didn't really have like an option. I just moved with them because I didn't really have anywhere else to go. I had to take a leave out of my job. I was working with in a group home with disabled children. And so that kind of heavy lifting work, they just wanted me to be very like careful, extra careful probably just because of the transplant and all of that. And they actually told me from the very beginning that likely I would miscarry one of the twins, just because it would be too much for my body, right?
The messaging, Kristy, like I can't even imagine all of the trauma of like all of this freaking messaging throughout this entire process.
Yeah.
So up until you delivered, you still were under the belief that one of the twins would likely pass away?
Yeah, or they said that like one twin can start to like, I can't remember what that's called, but they start to like take all the nutrients and then the other twin doesn't do as well and then can pass. And I do remember, so we were living in Edmonton. I was living with my parents. I don't even recall where the biological father was. Like, it was such a conflict, chaotic relationship because, he was into drinking and I'm pregnant now and I can't do that. And I remember just like, actually it was like 9/11 had happened and I was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe I'm bringing kids into this world. So then there was that kind of like, that like sadness. And I ended up going to the hospital not shortly after just because I had like really high blood pressure. And then they wanted to get me to term. They knew they weren't going to get me to term, but they wanted me to hold out as long as possible. I had a scheduled C-section. But unfortunately, I do not like staying in hospital. So I advocated, along with my mom helping, to get a pass for the weekend back to Red Deer. And I ended up going into birth. And I had to deliver in Red Deer, which is not where they wanted me. They wanted me in Edmonton.
Oh, okay. So now a second time, you have a procedure that ends up going not as planned for date. And so did you deliver naturally then, or did you have a C-section?
They did not want me to. They wanted me to deliver to have a C-section. But I remember like getting up in the middle of the night and there was like this wetness and I was like, oh, I need the bed. And then I was like, well, that's weird. Like, it doesn't smell like pee. And then I was like, it's still coming out and I can't control it. And so then I like knocked on my mom and dad's door and I'm like, hey, I think I might be in labor.
Did you have contractions or anything at that point?
I probably, actually, you know what, so my water broke, I probably did start having like these weird cramping sensations. And then I was like, I better wake my mom and dad up. I don't remember though at that age if I actually knew, hey, that's your water breaking.
Right. It was just like, this is weird.
Tells you that. Yeah. And we went to Red Deer Emergency, the hospital, and there I'm like, I think I'm in labor. I don't really know. The contractions are I think these are contractions. Like, there's a lot of like cramping and stuff going on. And then I remember a nurse checked and I was like, I wasn't very dilated. And then they were like, hey, we gotta call and get like ambulance. We're gonna stars you to Edmonton to get you there so you don't give birth here. And then she checked again and it was like, nope, we're not doing that. You're like 10 centimeters dilated and you're going to be giving birth here. And they called in a retired doctor to come like do the birth.
Stop. What?
Yeah, that poor guy.
Were you super scared when it was time? Yeah.
I remember like I was like, I have a pretty high pain tolerance, but it started to really hurt. And
Yeah.
I was like, I need drugs. And they're like, you don't have time for drugs.
This is like actually straight up my worst nightmare when I imagine having children is like, if someone said to me, what is your worst fear of having children? It's like being ready and being like, okay, yeah, I like would like an epidural or whatever. And then getting to the point where it's too late and you have no
Yeah.
choice. So like, my God, the respect I have for you for all, like so many reasons. But again, this is another thing of like, I'm doing this thing and that was not in the cards.
Yeah. And then like we have this like, I think we have as women, like we have this expectation of, and I think like actually, Brooke Shields talked about this in her book. I can't recommend her book enough. Down Came the Rain, about like our expectation when we have a baby, what the afterbirth will be like. That will be like holding our baby and like the husband. In my case, I didn't have a husband, so that was like another expectation out the door.
Yeah.
But that it would just be like so calm. It wasn't calm. It was chaotic. Miss Shayla and my first daughter came out breech, so she came out first, and then my second daughter, Michaela, she came out like all blue, and the cord was, I guess, wrapped around her neck, and she didn't cry right away. But then they don't cry right away when their lungs aren't fully developed, and they had to whisk them away and get them into intubation, and then send them to the Children's Hospital in Edmonton. Actually, they send them to the neonatal in the Alex, Royal Alex.
Oh, the Royal Alex. Yeah. Okay. I'm curious. So I don't want this to come off like a judgment. It's genuinely a question.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know, I spent like a good chunk of time in the early parts of my career working in the hospital. And one of the sections that I worked in was in like labor and delivery. Very, very seldom, not at all my area of expertise. But I always found it really hard as a social worker to see how often social work was referred to new moms for things that are just like outside of that expectation, right? Like no husband sitting at the bedside, not a mass amount of clothing or things to take baby home with, no big support system, like being young, whatever. Was there ever a question, Mark, when you were in the hospital by social work or like any sort of medical staff around your ability to be like the parent, the guardian, or like take care of the babies after they were born?
That's such a good question. You know, I don't think there was ever a question about my ability, probably because my mom was with me a lot.
Yeah.
But I will say there is a social worker. I wish I could remember her name because honestly, I think she was part of the reason that kind of got me into social work. I will never forget our conversation. And at that time, I'm still trying to make this relationship with the biological father work because I also grew up in this like conditioned environment that you should be married before you have children. And so, and not necessarily from my parents. I mean, my parents were married before they had children, so that was part of it. But I think even my grandparents, like, I remember telling my grandma that I was pregnant, and she's like, "Oh, your grandpa would be so disappointed," you know, like. And it says
it's also just like our culture, right? Like that's just like the society that we live in. It's like this is like that white picket fence idea of like we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. So like it's hard to avoid that messaging whether it's in your own household or not, right?
And I wanted that. Like I wanted the white picket fence. I wanted to be the stay-at-home mom. Like I'd be totally cool to do that. Well, at least I thought I would.
Yes.
But then like I remember that social worker like having that conversation with me about relationships. And it was just like, I can't even remember to this day what she said or what, but like she could tell that he was not treating me right. And she pointed it out. And I don't know, I wish I could go back and just like really remember that, but something she said, you know, really stuck. Like, and I remember it was really during the time that Coral, like Dawn's mom, was coming to meet the girls, and the biological father showed up, even though I told him I didn't want him there. And he showed up trying to cause like a fight and all of that stuff. And like, it was so messed up. But, you know, and I had to do my, like, I'm sure my parents were just like shaking their heads all the time. Like, but I had to learn some of that on my own too. I had to figure out that, okay, like, yes, I can have a family, but it's not the family I'm idealizing.
Yeah, huge. And like, I feel like this is like one of those things that it speaks so highly of just like who you are as a person is like, and like, it's so fascinating to listen to like the like early threads of like where this comes from, because you are very much a person who's like, okay, it didn't go the way that I expected it to, but that's okay. This is how it's going to go. Like, and it's just like so easy. Like, no, and it, you know, I'm not saying that for you it's easy, but from that good perspective of an outsider, like watching you just be like, okay, like, and shift, like radical accept, shift, radical accept, shift. It's like mind boggling. And it makes sense that this is, you know, like, this is how you had to operate. This is just what had to be.
You know, and I don't remember. I remember before when I was like diagnosed with like the restrictive cardiomyopathy, and I grew up, I would say, like in a somewhat religious atmosphere. No, my parents didn't go to church, but my grandma always was like, "You guys need to go to Sunday school," and so I would go to Sunday school. And I think as I'm aging, though, I have spiritual faith. But I remember seeing something, and it could have been Billy Graham, I can't remember, but something about when something happens to us, we always say, "Why me?" We never say, "Why not me?" And that always stuck with me. And you know, and I think about that a lot. Like, there was a time where, I had a little hiccup in my health, but it had been like 20 some years, and I was starting to feel really sorry for myself. And I was like, yeah, but why not me? I've been this lucky. So like, why not me? Because if it's not me, if I'm saying why me, I'm wishing it was someone else. How is that fair?
Right.
And
I almost wonder, you know, oh man, there's so much I want to get into with you. I want to come back to the girls. And I want to talk about, so you just mentioned, like, you know, you had like a hiccup with your health. So the heart that you currently have is Dawn's heart still.
Yes. Yeah, it'll be 28 years this May.
Oh my goodness. So statistically speaking, how long does a heart transplant generally have?
I think the longest living so far, I think, and I could be wrong, last time I Googled, I think was like 38 years.
Wow.
So we do know there is complications as the heart ages after transplant. But, you know, like I've been pretty fortunate. I've only had like one major episode of rejection. Other people are on second transplants. We also know, though, that if you get transplanted again, typically that second transplant doesn't last as long as the first one. There's other complications that go in that. Like your body's just, it's different. I don't know. Yeah.
So you, you know, I don't want to skip the middle part. So there was a time, I think you had mentioned to me, like maybe like 5-ish years ago, where you started to have some complications with this heart. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So cardiology. So one of the things, so after I had the girls, I found out I had human papillomavirus, so HPV, which we know is very, very, very contagious. What we don't talk about, though, is the people that are immune suppressed. So those with HIV, you know, those with solid organ transplants, maybe even cancer. I'm not sure. Anything that like your immune system suppresses can't fight that infection. So for the longest time, that was something that probably was like really, it was difficult because I was getting lasers. I had precancer cells. I had, like, I'm not kidding, I've probably had like over 30 lasers from like the time.
What does that look like? What does a laser treatment look like?
So I would typically go to the hospital or to like the Tom Baker, and the gynecology oncology would like literally, it's like a beam light. Like the very first laser I ever had was horrific. I couldn't wear pants for over a month. Like it was terrible. I did not know it was going to be that bad, but they'll laser inside too to get rid of any cancer cells, to get and so I actually, you know, I did get anal cancer at one point. I got it cut out, and I get monitored for that. So the problem is that people that are immune suppressed, like myself, we don't fight those infections. So and I kind of left out, my daughter too has also had a heart transplant.
Oh, don't you worry. I'm not going to let you leave that. We are coming back. I promise.
But like,
I feel like I could have this conversation with you for like 8 years and we still wouldn't cover the amount.
Oh, I know. But like, so we get warts on our hands quite a bit, frequently.
Okay.
I don't have any now, thank God. But like, So that can sometimes happen. And then it's just a really hard thing to get rid of. You can go and get so all the warts on your feet, warts on your hands, warts on your vagina, they're all human papillomavirus. The thing is, there's
Okay.
different strains of them. So the
Okay.
genital warts are caused by a sexually transmitted infection, HPV. Plantar warts are typically, going to a pool and not wearing shoes, right? Because they
Right.
love to thrive in that wet environment, which is why women tend to have more issues with HPV than men too, just because of our body
Right.
makeup. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, where was I going with that?
So you had no signs of having HPV prior to the girls being born, though. It was like something that you found out after they were born, or did you have any indication that something might be up before that?
I did. So actually, it's so funny because I was in Medicine Hat. I went to our family doctor. I was like, hey, if something's going on down there, he had a look. He's like, oh, Kristy, don't worry. That's a skin tag. Oh, okay, perfect. Not to worry. I was feeling a little I need a second opinion. I have no idea why I went to an ENT, ear, nose, throat doctor. They just happened to have a walk-in time I could go see one.
Which is hilarious because if you think about now, ENTs are a 2-year wait list to try and see.
Yeah, it's crazy.
To walk in.
They were also in the same office as my pediatric doctor that I had for a long time. So, and she said the same thing. She's like, yeah, hormonal changes. I also had a nurse look at it too. When I was pregnant, and same thing. And it wasn't until after the girls were born that my cardiologist, so my pediatric cardiologist from Edmonton, and he's like, Kristy, that's a virus. That's called HPV.
And this was, like you said, 2001, right?
Yeah.
Because this is around the same time then that the vaccine came out, right?
Yeah.
What was the vaccine? Oh, gosh,
Gardasil. So they were just starting to really research it. They were much was coming out in magazines about, HPV, and then they're doing trials on Gardasil. And I've gotten Gardasil. It isn't formulated though for people who've already had contact with the virus.
Okay.
So I'm waiting for that day. Let's help the people that are already struggling, because now we know cervical cancer is caused by HPV. We know that anal cancer, Farrah Fawcett died from that. That's HPV.
Wow.
Right?
And so, correct me if I'm wrong, because my understanding is that with HPV, so it is a sexually transmitted infection, but it is also something that we can have dormant in our bodies that doesn't necessarily act up. So what I'm understanding then is that you, somewhere in your sexual history, and I don't know if you ever found out if there was a connection to the birth dad of the girls, but it was something transmitted, but because you don't have the ability for your body to fight something to let it be quote unquote dormant, it would be active, and something that will inevitably always affect you because your body just can't fight it the same way.
Yeah. And in fact, when I was going through that health scare with the rejection,
yes,
I noticed the only reason I knew I was in rejection is because my HPV started to clear up in the vaginal area. And I said to my doctors, my immune system must be working. And then right away, yeah. And
so in some ways, it actually ended up being kind of helpful because it almost became something that you could.
It's like my signal warning.
Yeah, it's oh, something must be wrong. This is acting up. Oh, things are looking good, so my heart must be happy. It almost became like a physical warning system.
Yeah. And also, when we say sexually transmitted, I think too, that just skin to skin contact, your genital area and that person's genital area, if you have a virus, and this is the thing, you don't even have to be showing the symptom of the virus. You could be you're carrying it, right? That's why it's so hard to know if you have a male partner or female partner, if you don't see warts, you don't know. Right. Not everybody has the warts because, again, right, it goes back to immune system.
No. And so, again, I'm thinking of you back in that exact time frame. So I'm thinking about, you are now pregnant with, you got twins.
Yeah.
19, right around the rise of a lot of media coverage around don't be the statistic. Now you are being diagnosed with HPV, which in my understanding, when I think back to those years of Gardasil coming into the school system and everyone getting the shots, it was it was a craze. I remember it being a huge thing. Yeah. So now I didn't even know what HPV was prior to this. And then all of a sudden it becomes a thing that everyone knows about and everyone's getting the vaccine. So you've been diagnosed with it and now it's showing up everywhere as a conversation. how did this affect your image of yourself and like what this meant?
Well, I remember like sometimes I'd read a magazine or I'd hear people talking about it and they're like, you don't want, or ew, that's gross. And I old me sits there quietly, not saying anything, just kind of like sulking in my own like shit, I guess, right?
Wow,
New me
for sure.
actually, like, I actually say things now. I actually pop up and say like, hey, like I'll call people if they're making fun of someone with like an STI or, because we always have this like idea, oh, it'll never happen to me. There is this definite like kind of thing that's like I'm damaged, I'm broken, I'm dirty, I'm damaged goods. There's actually a book written about it. It was one of the professors, she wrote a dissertation on STIs, sexually transmitted infections. They're non-curable. So like herpes, HPV, HIV, right? Like all of these things. And, like it is, I think sometimes though, when I was first diagnosed, and I don't know, I used to feel really, really bad that I was mad about it, or that I was feeling, I guess like feeling, I was always like, I tend to do this, and I don't know why. Like, I kind of like rationalize. It's like, well, Kristy, you're not in a wheelchair, so suck it up. Like my more worst case scenario, people don't know that you have HPV unless you tell them. I guess that's one, right? Like, there's this like rationalization. I used to pray to God all the time, like, cure me, cure me, cure me. I'll do this if you cure me. So like that bargaining, but at some point I just had to like fully accept that this is the way it's going to be. And you know what? Like, I would date people and I'd be like, so I also have HPV.
Just like drop it in a conversation. Like, it's fine.
Yeah. I am married now, and, my husband is very aware, and, it's something we navigate together, and it's not always easy because there is a lot of self acceptance and stuff that I have to do. It's not, he could tell me he thinks I'm beautiful or all the things, right? But it doesn't matter because it's inside me. I have to figure it out. But there's also this, like, I think at one time too, when I was younger, there's this, like, I got pregnant, and then a result also, like, the two things you're supposed to not, happen to you is pregnancy and STI. That's why we use condoms typically. Both those things happen. So it was hard not to have resentful attitude towards even like my kids, right? Like, even though it's not their fault, it's a choice I made. I made the bed. I have to lay in it.
Right.
And it's hard to talk to your parents about that too, though, because yes, mom and dad, I had sex and I got pregnant, but I also got an STI.
How were your parents with it?
You know what? My dad's pretty quiet. He doesn't say much. My mom has probably been like, in terms of the STI, like, we talk a lot about it. She's kind of been with me through all my lasers. She was like my driver a lot of the times, and like very, very aware of it. And like, but you know what? I think now it's just something I have, and I sometimes look at it like my vagina has had warts longer than it did it now. But I do sometimes in my mind go back to those times. But I get mad, I guess, at like, there are people who just go out and have unprotected sex and have no consequences. But I also don't want to get to that point where I'm like, I'm resentful, because I don't want to be a resentful person. Again, why not me?
Right. Yeah. Oh, I also just want to go back to something that I feel like we just like glossed over, which was you also had a cancer diagnosis in the middle of this?
Yeah, anal cancer, which is not fun to tell people.
No.
It's more.
So how old were you when you were given the diagnosis?
So that was 2017, so I would have been like 30. I'm not good at math, Allegra, help me. 34?
My gosh, I'm like, don't ask. Okay, so 2017. So not actually that, I mean, it's longer now than I'd like to believe, but like, and so yeah, like you said, it's a like, hey, I have anal cancer. Like, it feels like it's a hard one to say. So how did you tell people, and like, how did it come around to you finding out, and what was your response to that?
So I actually, because I read a book by, oh gosh, I can't remember his name, but it's called What Your Doctor May or May Not Tell You About Abnormal Pap Smears. And I always had abnormal pap smears because of the HPV. But I also, in the book, he talks about making sure you get anal pap smears because the HPV can show up in the anal area. And so I actually advocated for them to start swabbing the anal area. And yeah, there was some squamous cell carcinoma growing inside the anal area.
So you wouldn't have found it unless you were doing the readings and advocating for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's kind of sad to think that though, too, because like they wouldn't have been swabbing that area, doing like a pap type smear, like an anal smear,
Right.
had I not been asking. Right.
Right.
I do remember it was my cardiology team that brought me in to say, hey, you've been diagnosed with anal cancer, squamous cell carcinoma. And I ended up going to this doctor, and I see him every 3 months and just get checked. And yeah, so.
And did you have to have any specific treatments for that cancer for it to go into remission?
So like they didn't do any kind of chemo or anything like that. He did what they call like a hemorrhoidectomy. Basically, they take that infected area out and just kind of. So the unfortunate part about that though is that sometimes I have leaky bowel. So like just like you can laugh and pee, I could laugh and poo a little.
Right. Yeah, it's like this is just a part of the, and like again, Kristy, like the fact that we're just talking like this and you're just like, this is my life, like, and this is the part about your personality that I'm just like always in awe of.
Oh,
like,
thank you.
It's like even knowing you and then like listening to it in this way, it's like my brain cannot comprehend how you are who you are. Like I can't fathom it. And to add, I feel like I'm just like, here's this like 7-layer dip to like add to this then. You also struggled with borderline personality disorder.
I never got a diagnosis, but now that I am an adult and I'm doing the mental health, I actually see flavors of it for myself. Just in
Where
how
do you think it would show up?
Well, I think in relationships, specifically more so like with significant other relationships. Like, okay, for example, I'll even use like the girl's biological father. Like, yes, we weren't a good fit. He had his own stuff, right? But like, for example, like I would, maybe not consciously, but I would create a situation, and then if he didn't meet that expectation, or like whatever it was, like, and I would tell myself like, you don't love me. Like there's this huge fear of abandonment that I had. And then I would actually act like, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say I would act crazy. But it's also like, I think we're all kind of like, I think there's all part of us that could touch that. I mean, I was a teenager who had lots of medical stuff. So there was always like I kind of like always compare it, like, not that I'm Britney Spears or anything like that, but imagine being a childhood actor or actress or whatever. And then you get all this attention, and then all of a sudden, boom, no attention. And that's how it kind of was growing up. Like by the time I was 13, I was like thrust into this kind of spotlight within medicine hat media. And then I grew up like always having this attention, and maybe I like craved it, but I didn't realize I was craving it because I didn't have that awareness yet either.
No, and you know what? I think I go back to even earlier in this conversation where you say like that you remember having this like underlying people pleasing mentality of also like, I can't put this on other people because I'm already too much. And we understand that borderline personality disorder has a lot to do with attachment wounds. And so like understanding that there's also a insecure part of attachment that will happen if it feels like you're a burden to the people who are also your caregivers, and I don't want to be too much for them.
Yeah.
But being given the medical attention, it's still like a different type of attachment from an emotional perspective.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that in some ways, you end up in chosen relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, and struggle with your attachment to those people if it's not chaotic and big.
Yeah. And growing up in a home like that, like it was chaotic at times, right? Like, and I love my parents dearly. I do know, and I acknowledge that they did what they could with what they had at the time. And I kind of, having a sick child is not ever easy. And then on top of that, like, I think I would like threaten suicide to my relationship people, like, the girl's biological father. Well, I'm just going to kill myself then. And like, And then I did eventually have a suicide attempt, but that's because it's like this overwhelming sense of like, well, and I think there was a little bit of postpartum depression that was not diagnosed. I mean, granted, I'm a 19-year-old with a STI. I have no fucking clue what I'm doing.
Right.
My mom and dad don't have the healthiest attachments because of what they went through and grew up. And, and they were just kind of thrust in the media, and like, there's so much. Yeah.
So much.
But I also find
How?
like borderline personality disorder, like I get it. It can be very difficult for people if you have that full blown diagnosis. However, that being said, like I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, that was definitely like, and I even look back with my husband who I'm married with now, like in our early relationship, like I was very highly needed. And if he didn't answer my text right away, like whoop, I was flipping my lid. Like, what are you doing? Why aren't you fucking calling me back? And like, and when I tell people this, they're like, what? No, you're not like,
Oh, yeah.
oh, like I
remember the first time that you told me, you were like, yeah, I struggled with borderline. And I was like, Kristy, what the fuck are you talking about? Cause like, it's so not who you are now.
Yeah. But I
like,
can
it's
sometimes,
hard to
yeah.
fathom.
Oh, ask my husband. I mean, maybe he forgets some of it. I pray he does. Like, I remember, I can't even, like, the fights we've had in the past, and I'm gonna say, like, that Taylor Swift song, like, Anti-Hero, that is my jam, because that's it. Like, it's me. I'm the problem, it's me. That song, like, when it came out, that's my borderline personality disorder. Every single thing.
How did you get through it? How did you come to this? How did you get to where you are now?
Honestly, I think education for myself.
I mean, you are an avid reader. If people haven't put that together in this conversation, I don't know anyone who reads more than you do.
Well, I don't finish all my books, Allegra.
Whatever, you get the good parts.
Yeah.
At least you pick it up. I'm not even picking it up half the time. So you're 10 steps ahead of me here.
I think biggest one is education. And I think somewhere along the line, I learned that we're all going to fuck up. Like I've actually, like, I've sent texts and I've called my daughters and I've said, like, I was not a good parent. Like, I will never forget. And, this is not a great story to tell, but like, I look back and I wish I could change this, but I remember, Shaylin was in the hospital, just had her heart transplant. And one of my friends was getting married and I was her bridesmaid. And instead of going and being her bridesmaid, I should have been at the hospital. I was at the bar in Medicine Hat getting drunk while my daughter's in the hospital with, I mean, my mom was there with her, but that's not the point. That's not the point. The point is, right? But I mean, but showing compassion now, I look back, I'm like, and I've told Shaylin, like, I'm sad that I made that choice. That is a choice I made. I have to live with that. That's not for her to hold, and even how I raise my kids, like, I snap. I was like, stop crying. Don't do that. Like, what are you crying about? I'll give you something to cry about. Like, looking back, like, but once we know better, we do better. And there's so much power in coming to my kids and being like, I'm sorry I acted like that. Like, it's not you.
This is such a huge example of what the power of taking accountability is.
Yeah, but it's like hard to do that. Yeah. Because people want to judge. People are like, right? But it's like, no, like, even as I'm saying all this stuff and I'm like, oh, if some of my family hear this, what are they going to, but I don't care, because this is me showing up authentic. Like, and I'm learning to do different.
Right. And it's not that you're like, hey, this is what I do and I'm super proud of it. It's like, I know that this is what I've done. And I'm also recognizing that, like, this is, like, I'm grateful that I learned the problems with this so that I can be the person I want to be and, like, keep growing and working on it. Like, and I think that's the thing about taking accountability is I think that we think if we do it, that means that, like, that's our status. We're cemented in stone. We're seen as that thing that we own, that we fucked up on. But, like, the point is not that that's the end. It's like, I recognize that this was a problem. I fucked up.
Yeah.
So I am going to learn from this and I'm going to become a better person because of this. And then I want to, in your case, give back to other people and teach them that they are not a product of their fuck ups. They can do other things.
Yeah.
And, like, that is literally the money. That is juice of the best part of what I think therapy is. It's like, if we can get to the point where we just say the hardest thing,
Yeah.
like the guilt, the shame, the accountability of it, the power of it's gone, because now we can actually do something with it instead of like sitting and like wallowing in that feeling.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that's powerful. I mean, that's the most powerful feeling in the entire world, is like, no one can take away my self-image because I hold myself to a high standard. And I also recognize I'm human and I'm allowed to fuck up.
Yeah. And like, as much as I'm learning and I'm doing the work and I'm, you know, still continuing, it's a process, I look and see, like, I can even see how it is trickling down. Like, even my own daughter, like, sending me stuff, like some mental health tidbits, right? Like, she's doing her own stuff. Like, not everyone's going to follow you on that journey, and that's okay, because they don't have to.
No.
But it's also okay if you mess up, like, right? Like, we have to give ourselves grace.
Yes.
And
okay, let's go back to the thing, the elephant in the room that we still haven't talked about. So you deliver the girls.
Yeah.
And how old are they when you start to realize that something's up?
Like, something's up. Oh, something's up.
We are seeing a heart issue. Let's go there.
They're 2 years old. Just turned 2, but like 2 and a month. 2 and 2 months.
And at this point, you still don't know that your heart condition is genetic.
Yeah, still at this point, it's like, we are under the assumption that it's not genetic. I mean, my dad had some heart problems by this time,
right?
But nothing, you know, no transplant, no nothing like that.
Right.
Yeah. My brother had some like heart possibility things, but it was never like, it was almost like not confirmed, but like,
just like weird suspected things.
Yeah, like he had a heart murmur when that wasn't something he had before. So like, it was never like fully confirmed that it was like a restrictive cardiomyopathy.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So what were the initial symptoms that were like, uh-oh, something's going on here?
Shaylin was sick. Shaylin threw up at daycare. They called me. They're like, she's throwing up. Can you come get her? I'm like, yeah, I'll come get her. And then I took her to Strathmore Emergency, actually. But by the time we got there, because I had to go to the STD clinic downtown Calgary. Big, huge line, STD. My mom brought me. They did some liquid nitrogen on the HPV. Then we took Shay to Strathmore Emergency. By the time we got there, it was later. It was probably like 7:00 at night. And she was kind of better by then. She was kind of running around and being her like fun self. And he even said, "Oh, you're that heart family." Kind of like, oh, like, and just, you know, kids are resilient. They can be sick and then an hour later be fine. 2 days later, she was throwing up again. And so this time I took her to Children's, and that night, we spent the night, and the next day they did an echo. And the doctor doing the echo was actually a resident doctor when I had my transplant. And I was sitting in the echo machine, like in the room, and he looked at me and he just like nodded. Like, yeah, she has it.
And you just knew.
Yeah. And actually my best friend was up from Calgary and, up from Medicine Hat here in Calgary. And I just went out to the to the waiting area, and all I could see was like the walls were just like, I felt like they were closing in, and I fell into her. And then later that night I used the exact same payphone to call family that I used when I needed a transplant. So that was kind of surreal.
Stop.
I should have asked them to keep that payphone when they renovated the Children's.
Yeah, you're like, this is my phone.
Yeah. Let me have this. And then we were sent to Edmonton for transplant workup in November, and she got her heart January 23rd, 2004.
Wow. Was there any doubt as the mom that things were not going to work out or that she was going to pass away? Like, what was your attachment at that point?
I tend to think I'm a realist, so I always think there's that option. Like, there is that possibility, right? Like, that is possible. People don't always get that prayer met. And, you know, you can imagine it, but I don't know, like, I have these, like, situations I run through in my head, but I don't know what I would actually do. Again, it's hard to understand, like, it's hard to know, like, my daughter needs somebody to die who's also probably around her age. And so that's a really hard thing too. I think it really gave me a perspective of like what my parents were going through. But in some ways, it was like I had that other perspective of like how shitty I felt after my transplant. Like, it's not you get your transplant and you're like fine the next day. Like, it's not like just changing the battery in your car. You're good to go.
And I mean, and she's 2 years old at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if it's better or worse. I think sometimes it's hard because at that age, like, she doesn't have the verbal vocabulary to say how she's feeling, which we know when you can't talk about those feelings, that can be more difficult.
Yeah.
But then also, we do talk about it and there's things she doesn't remember either, which might be a blessing in disguise too. It's hard to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How is she now?
She's wonderful. She just had her transplant checkup yesterday. Everything's doing good. Yeah, she'll be 20 years post-transplant. No episodes of rejection. Like, yeah, she's doing amazing.
So both your girls now are in their 20s?
Yeah, 22.
And do they ever ask you questions about like your life and like your book, and like is any of this interesting to them, or is it just kind of their norm?
You know what? I think it's kind of their norm. And I don't know if that's like a good thing or bad thing either, because I've been in the hospital and then it's like, oh, mom's in the hospital again. And so there's kind of this like, what do you call that? Like complacency, I guess, because that is just our life somewhat.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like they'll ask, when I wrote the book at first, I think they would be like, hey mom, my teacher wants a copy, or hey mom, but I think I try to normalize it too as much as I can. Like, I don't want them to take on that stuff either, because it's not theirs to take on.
Is it okay if I share recent events?
Yeah.
So Kristy sends all of us a message at Kindred Roots. We have a group chat that is just a bunch of nonsense, if I'm being honest. And hey guys, like, I just need to cancel my appointment. There's just an ambulance coming to pick me up. Like, so nonchalant. I'm just getting picked up in an ambulance right now. It's like not a big deal. Just some like heart things. And we're all like, Kristy, what the fuck is going on? And Kristy gets admitted to Foothills, finds out that she's had a minor heart attack and is pending an angiogram. And we're all like beside ourselves. Like, can we come do anything? Like, do you need anything? And she's literally like, oh, I'm just like making the most of it. I'm just like reading a book. I'm gonna like do some more research on EMDR. Oh, I'm in a like shared room with 4 people. It's fine. Like, I'm just learning to like appreciate my space when I get home. And again, I was just like, this woman is unbelievable. Like, I would be having an absolute conniption shit, not even just about the medical side of it, but like the being in a shared hospital room with 4 people. Like, how do you now, knowing that you have, you're 28 years in, from what you've seen, like 38 years is like the long part. A second transplant isn't always as effective as the first. And then things like this happen. How do you keep a positive attitude and not flip a lid?
Well, I think there are days where I'm not so positive, and I think that's okay, right? Because I just sit in that and I just kind of, I might close myself off a little and I just kind of be with myself. But the other part of it is I also know how lucky I am and how grateful I am in that I'm here 27 years longer because of Dawn, right? So, I mean, and this might sound really, really radical, but like I also have this like huge radical acceptance of we are all going to die. And I think I probably think about death a lot more than most people, but however, that is also like preparing for your death. Like, I asked my husband the one day, like, how do you want to die? He's like, why would you ask me that? I'm like, no, like, what does a death with dignity look like? Yeah. He's like, I don't know. Like, he couldn't answer that. And I'm like, here's how I want to die. And I really, like, I've said to all my family, like, I want to die at home. Do not let me die in the hospital. I do not want to die in the hospital. Like, when I have to go to the hospital, I do get a little bit, I don't get a little sad. I get really sad. I don't like hospitals, but I really have to work on just like changing that mind frame, because really your thoughts do depict like how you feel. It is true. And, again, it's just like kind of looking at again, like the why not me? I have chronic kidney failure or kidney issues. So I have kidney failure, but that's long-term use of medication. But again, we have to hold things like kind of flexible in life because life is uncertain. So just as, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't. I could be in the hospital tomorrow. You could too. I probably have a higher chance of ending up in the hospital than you do. But again, we don't really know. And so I take the days that I have healthy and I relish them. I soak it up.
I want, again, to just say that you are exceptional in every way, shape, and form. You're not just an exceptional person, you are an exceptional therapist. And I think that this conversation highlights so much of why I'm a firm believer that like the work we do in our personal lives is the work that we end up doing with people. And like, you are such a light, and I just feel incredibly blessed that I get to have you. Oh, I could start crying that I get to have you in my life and on my team. And I know that this conversation is so far from over. We already have so many topics planned in like little offshoots of this that, as a team we're going to talk about. But I just like, thank you for being you and not ever giving up and just being such a great example of like, the whole world could shit on you and you can still come out and find a rainbow somewhere. Like, it's the most inspiring thing ever. And I feel very lucky to know you.
I'm going to have to come in the other room now and hug you.
And I'm going to come over and give you a big hug now. That's what we're going to do. But
thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, of course. And for anyone who wants to know more, like, please, I will link Kristy's book. It's on Amazon. We have a copy here at the office. Like I said, Kristy's accepting clients. I have a feeling she's going to be increasing her hours soon. So maybe some more availability. Just going to put that out there. And more conversations to come. But thank you so much for doing this.
I just want to say, Allegra, thanks so much for making this feel so safe. And like, I don't know, I wasn't nervous at all. And it was just like, I don't know, it was just so nice. I could keep chatting with you forever. You're like an amazing interviewer, by the way.
Oh, stop it. Thank you.
You are. Thank you so much.
I love you. I'm coming to give you a hug.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.